Tuckman received his Bachelor of Arts degree in 1957 from the College of the City of New York. His undergraduate education also included study at the University of Mexico. He received his Master of Arts degree from Columbia University in 1959, and his work on his PhD has been on the life and work of I.M. Soutine. And those of us who toured the Soutine show here in 1968 can certainly attest to his superlative knowledge of that great painter. He was a Fulbright Scholar in 1960 and 61. He has been art editor of the Modern Art section of the Columbia Encyclopedia, 3rd edition, 1962. He was on the curatorial and lecture staff of the Guggenheim Museum from 1962 to 1964, and during that time, he directed Van Gogh and Expressionism show in the summer of 1964. He has been our curator of modern art here at the Los Angeles County Museum since 1964. And during that time, he has directed the following shows: the Peter Voulkos Show in 1965, the New York School Show, 1965, the Kitai, 1965, David Smith, 1965, 5 Younger California Artists in 65, the Kienholt Show in 66, the Irwin Price Show in 66, the John Mason Show in 1966, American Sculpture of the 60s in 67, and the Soutine Show in 1968. And he has been either author or editor or both of the accompanying catalogs for all of those exhibitions. And his other publications include Soutine, Art Council of Great Britain in 64, Soutine Portraits, Art de France in 64, William de Kooning, Les Peintres Célèbres in 64. He has been a member of the Board of Governors of the Watts Tower Committee and a United States juror of the Tokyo Biennale in 1967. He's more of a curator. He's more than a curator. He's an impresario. Mr. Tuckman, please. I'm sorry, the lovely lady with him is Mrs. Jane Livingston.
We put this meeting off for 1 week so that everyone, my understanding was that we put the meeting off for 1 week so that everyone would have time to read the book, since the book came out last week, and that Jane Livingston and I would be here and answer questions, because we're still installing the show. So I hope someone has a question about art and technology or life, poetry, or something. Okay, you know that we started this in '66, that by the Art and Technology program, the idea of which was to get artists access to industrial forces that they could never otherwise have access to for a multiplex of reasons. By 1969, we had over 20 artists working in over 20 corporations, most of them in Southern California. We were going to open the exhibition, which is one of the important results of this program. I think another important result being the book that you probably have seen by now. And you haven't. I see. We were going to open the exhibition last April 15th. Instead, we postponed it for a year because we opened the exhibition in a preview form in the United States Pavilion. We were invited by the United States Information Agency to be the official New Arts show. We had 8 of the 16 artists in the exhibition presented in Japan to an audience of 10,800,000 people. The exhibition opens here on May 10th, evening of May 10th, and will run for 4 months. And I think it's a landmark exhibition. Hi.
Mr. Tuckman, have the companies involved indicated continuing interest in participation by artists with their materials and their resources? And
I'll answer your second one first. As of May 10th, we're out of the art and technology business. I always thought that, we always knew that a museum is not the perfect vehicle to do such a marriage broker role as we were doing. But no one else was doing it. And therefore I felt we had to do it and that we could do it. I think time has proven that I was right. But after the exhibition opens, and we maintain it for 4 months, I think if anything like this happens again, it will be partly because of the precedent we set, but it will not be done by us. One example of a very gratifying result is that the Arts Council of Great Britain, which is a very powerful organization and responsible for much of the cultural life in England, is adapting, or has told me that they will adapt art and technology into a national program for 10 years. And they will, using the federal government's influence, acquire English corporations and put artists in residence there. So I think there'll probably be some fallout like that internationally and perhaps in the US. I think if anything happened in the United States, it would have to be through some quasi-governmental agency, probably something under the National Endowment on the Arts. And I think that may happen. But after the show is over, we're finished. So far as companies wanting to go on with it, it's very difficult still to generalize about what happened, because we, in the course of this thing, as you'll see when you see the book, there were 80 artists involved, ranging in age from 20 to 69, some 37 corporations that signed contracts and had some rather prolonged contact with us or with artists, and 100 other companies that had nothing to do with us, that we contacted and that were not interested at all. By the end of the program, companies were beginning to call us rather than our soliciting them. But to think of all the logistics of all these interactions of 80 artists, 40 companies over a period of 3 years, it's very hard still for Jane and for me to make conclusions about how much they would want to do again. It's very hard to make conclusions yet even about the artists, although I would say there we're beginning to be able to say that of the 16 artists in the show, it would seem that 12 or 13 of them have made the best work of their careers in this exhibition. Yeah.
Well, that brings another question. What is
Good.
your outlook if the companies do not continue their support of the arts?
What is, I missed that word.
What is their prospect? For instance, how will Mr. Oldenburg's work and be affected by a change in the resources available to them?
I think for the better. I think the fact that the bag was accomplished, all of a sudden, he, for example, got an incredible commission after the bag was realized, because no one could have believed you could make it. Well, it's made. And a man in New York has commissioned him to do a piece that I'm sure could not have happened until the ice bag was realized. There are other examples of this. For example, Richard Serra is making 2 pieces here with Kaiser Steel. One is of enormous dimension and enormous weight, and it will serve as a sketch for a commission in the future. In other words, the existence of this thing will undoubtedly act as a springboard to a more permanent and even larger piece. I think the same holds for a piece that the Tony Smith sculpture being made with Container Corporation of America. It's being made in fiberboard, in an impermanent material, and will be destroyed after the show. But I think its existence will consolidate a dreamed-of commission of enormous scale for the Cleveland Museum. So I think there'll be that kind of thing.
I think one thing should be made clear about the artists in the exhibition. By no means all of them are artists whose work relies alone or even primarily on technology. Such artists as Oldenburg or Tony Smith or even Rauschenberg or Ron Kittai work normally or have in the past and really will in the future in other ways. They're sculptors or they're painters even or graphic artists. And this experience is something which is, in a sense, an anomalous event in their careers, but it will certainly change their future work. And I think as for the other artists, those like Newton Harrison, who worked with gas plasmas, or Boyd Mefford, who works with strobe lights, or Robert Whitman, who is one of the more experienced technological artists in the country, the experience they've gained through us will be valuable to them very much on the level of having gained terrific insight and just know-how in terms of what to do when they're dealing with corporation people and how to go about their next project. I mean, next time they will not probably have the kind of official sponsored access to industry that we've given them, but they certainly aren't going to stop making art. And one reason for this is that they will have made connections that they can use in the future on their own. There certainly is a great future for technological art in this country, even though the program here isn't going to sustain and endure. But I think in reading the catalog, one of the key points that will be of help to you in grasping the exhibition and making the exhibition somehow graspable to others is the fact that there is a real sort of breakdown in kinds of work made, and it really falls into 3 categories, which are outlined there. The other thing we should mention that there is going to be a flyer that will be handed out free, because obviously not everyone's going to buy the catalog. Maybe, 20, well, I don't know, 1 in 20 people will. But we've written a paragraph on each work, and in the order in which one sees it as one walks through the exhibition, because there is only one way that one can traverse the show, which all of you should read very soon, I think, and which will answer some questions that you will have and other people will have. And hopefully this will make the show somewhat more comprehensible, because it's going to be, for a lot of people, a very mystifying experience.
Yes.
I suppose one reason I broke down those categories is that I assumed that what most people would expect to see in a show called Art and Technology was tech art or technological art, implying flashing lights and a lot of sound effects and that sort of thing. And that kind of image is not at all fulfilled when one sees it, so it seemed to me that there should be some explanation for that. And the 3 categories basically, well, let's see, the first one that I talked about was just really industrial fabrication and mechanical industrial execution, which is certainly a phenomenon in art which isn't new. I mean, sculptors have been making huge things for centuries that required collaboration of one sort or another just to build. In that category, one would subsume Oldenburg, Tony Smith, Richard Serra, Ron Kittai, Irvin Falstrom, artists who really are making just big objects, and in the case of Oldenburg, of course, is very much more than an object, and it's true in the case of Smith too. But again, it doesn't really involve what we think of as special, advanced, new space-age technology. These artists, one might expect to have a very easy time of it, because they do have a tradition from which to rely on. But I think we found in many cases that there was maybe the greatest psychological difficulty of all with these artists. And it's very difficult for an artist like Oldenburg to abdicate any amount of control in the thing. I mean, he's in a situation where a lot of decisions that are very important are of necessity not made by him. And that's a very interesting question, and the same thing would hold true for the others of that category. But I think in all the cases that I've mentioned here, these artists have been enabled to make works on a scale which is ordinarily only dreamt of. And of course that is terribly satisfying. The second category is that involving media which are more specialized, laser beams. Rockne Krebs is doing 2 laser pieces for us, an outdoor piece and an indoor piece. Of course, a terrific example of this is the Harrison piece, which is gas plasmas. It's a medium which has really never before been used by an artist, and yet is eminently aesthetic. Its gas plasmas create really pure light and can be controlled and manipulated to go through color change and pattern change. So it's almost a painterly kind of medium, but a terrifically sophisticated one. And Boyd Mefford working with strobes, that sort of thing. The artists in our show I think in every case have somehow transcended the ordinary pitfalls which one has found in recent other attempts to use these kinds of media for art, basically because each of them has singled in on a particular phenomenon and known precisely what he was after and used it in a very pure and a very pragmatic and kind of sensible way, so that we have some of the best examples of technological art ever seen and maybe ever made. On the third hand were a certain number of artists who really did not interest themselves so much in making objects as such of any sort, whether they were monuments or whether they were light and sound pieces. They were really more interested in using the opportunity to go into corporations to experiment with the dynamics of the situation per se. In other words, John Chamberlain at the Rand Corporation or James Byers at Hudson Institute, on a very high level, played, and they really did play games, and they used the people and the minds in which they were in contact to document something as a phenomenon. Both of them came out with works which are rather poetic in form. But a great deal of the significance of their collaboration lies apart from anything that could be seen. James Byers is participating in the exhibition in a rather unusual way. The foyers are being painted gold for him, and there will be slide presentations of questions which he formulated during his time with Hudson as the self-proclaimed World Question Center, and he was after the 100 most significant questions in the world. His collaboration with Herman Kahn at Hudson was very influential in the sort of drift of the whole project and the way it came about. But certainly what one will see and sense as one goes through the exhibition is only a very small and extraneous part of this very important experience that he had at Hudson. So one would call that third category conceptual or, on another hand, experimental. There's a case of people working at an aerospace corporation, Robert Irwin, who you all know, and James Turrell, who worked at Garrett, which I would also put under the third category because they did not make an object, although they were working with a perceptual psychologist and working in very classic scientific experimental forms. They didn't come up with anything which really could be exhibited, although Bob is submitting a piece for the exhibition, which was a work which came out of thinking, very indirectly out of thinking at Garrett, and was done parallel to this. But again, this is, the third category is perhaps the most difficult to pin down and maybe the most interesting. I think the kind of thing that Irwin was into at Garrett may be the surest sign of a real radical wave of change for the future in terms of artists and technology, more so than anything that happened in a way. But you have to read the catalog to find out more about it.
That they be good artists, and that hopefully they cover as wide a spectrum of possibility as we could find. We tried to get different nationalities, different age groups, and so on. We were not interested in technologically oriented artists. In fact, we were probably biased against them. But I would say just quality. Women artists were encouraged to enter ballistics and ordnance manufacturers. No. There were some companies that were absolutely off limits to women, because even Jane couldn't even get in, and she was wearing a big thing that said LACMA. Other than that, no comment. Yes?
Are any automobiles included?
No, why?
It seems like this type of design should be included.
Well, there's a diesel engine. I
There's
don't
a
know what's
diesel
wrong with
engine,
that.
right. There's a diesel engine in the show. But I don't think automobiles have any place in this. It's not a design show of any kind.
I was just waiting to get the sponsorship, and there were companies that did not want to get involved.
They didn't want to have an artist in residence. You know, very few companies wanted. We got 37 companies. That took 2 years. We approached, I think, 260 companies to try to talk them into it. No one had ever tried to put an artist in residence in any significant way before. And we were asking them to put up with a stranger that we would choose, not them, for 3 months. And almost no one wanted any part of it. Almost everyone wanted no part of it. Yes?
Apart from the publicity,
In certain cases, yes. For example, Rockne Krebs at Hewlett-Packard worked with lasers and was, I think, influential in making them rethink certain things about lasers. And I think together with the company, there's a patent that will be coming out, which could have radical significance, which involves placing lasers. It would be used by architects and city planners, where you'd make sheets of laser light very simply, rather than actually erect entire buildings. And that way you can study the ecology of the situation without committing to actually digging out earth and so on. So there have been some extraordinary possible ramifications that way. And some of the artists definitely have affected. Irwin, as Jane was speaking so nicely about Irwin and Garrett, both men, Dr. Wirtz, who's one of very brilliant and important perceptual psychologist, the head of a division at Garrett, was profoundly affected. We could see the change in him from the time we met him till now, just as Irwin. His ties got wider, hair got longer, doesn't show up at work anymore. Irwin's got a crew cut, very narrow ties. Yes. Yes. It was determined by us this way. We raised, by and large, $7,000 from companies, and roughly that amount was turned over to artists. They were paid $250. They were paid I can be complicated about it, but they were paid an honorarium and a per diem per week of $390 a week while they were working, and they had a contract that ran for 3 months. So they got about $5,000 and a couple of air tickets from wherever they were. That's roughly the way it worked. Everyone was pleased with them. I think it's the first time artists have been paid so much money, ever. Yes.
I'm wondering, maybe this sounds very naive, but I'm wondering what the motivation was to put the artists together with the industry. I know you said something about making certain resources available.
My grandfather was a shotgun. Never thought of that before.
I'll become a stock
It's
answer.
very... Wait till you read the book. I really wrestled with that one. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Devastating.
That's a good question.
Good question.
I think we talked at one point about whether or not to do an acoustic guide, and our immediate reaction was we shouldn't do that. And as a matter of fact, we did a very special thing recently by sending to the guards, to the security force here, copies of the introduction so they could read it and have some idea of what to say when they're just standing around there and people asking questions. There'll be more guards there than usual, and it's very important that that the traffic flow be controlled and that people spend a certain amount of time in each room and go through in the right sequence. So that will take care of certain things to a large extent. And I do think that we have been assuming all along that people really should be given the opportunity to simply come into this thing and confront it contemplatively and have their own time and their own pace as they go through the show. And it certainly is not the kind of show that can bear over-explanation in the sense that most retrospective exhibitions, for example, can. It's very hard to, to go on after that. I mean, to sort of see what there certainly will be a lot of interest and a lot of questions. I have a feeling that most people will be more likely to ask the kinds of questions that docents could answer after they've been through the show rather than while they're there.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. We hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah.
Maybe we should investigate freshly how to do this.
Yeah.
Maybe meeting after the show, or making clear that people can come somewhere right after the exhibition. It will be impossible to walk through because of the nature of the exhibition. Yes.
I thought you might possibly tell us a little about the installation, because that probably
It's all compartments. Well, it would take about an hour to describe how you do it, but everything is a compartment. You have an hour. Huh. They're waiting for us up there. It's all compartments, and but I think, if not, I think every single place is a total room, and there must be about 11 of those. Yes. But don't we take that up when we meet with the docents that are touring the show, rather than in a big meeting like this? Oh, I was told that this was not the time. And I think it's not the time. I think we'll have to walk through the show with the people that will be touring people. Yes.
We're planning also to give tours for the students, LA City school children, through the summer season. Now, how would you suggest that we approach the young person, the age being junior high to high school?
How do you ordinarily approach the student?
Well, it does, yes, it depends on the show, and we have normal question and answer participation kind of approach to students, but I thought perhaps you might, if you first of all approve the concept of bringing young people in groups to the exhibition, and if so, you might have some suggestions on how to deal with it, the particular material.
I don't think of that audience as any different for the exhibition than anyone else.
I think the kids will just groove. I mean, I think kids will be very easy in this kind. I think it'll be fun just to take kids through it. And I really don't see any particular problem that you wouldn't confront another show. I mean, in a lot of cases, I would think one would really have to stretch to make kids look and see things. In this case, just the opposite is going to be the case. It's going to be hard to get them out of certain compartments, maybe, but it's not going to be hard to,
I couldn't agree
you
more.
know, to
It's very powerful stuff.
I think what Shirley is saying, as a student docent, that is there really a need for a docent? Or, I mean, some students would rather, will they just get just as much of a impact by just being let loose and not even having a docent?
that may be true.
That's what I think should be.
Yeah.
Patrick, you have designed the show. I've gone several times, and I listened to docents trying to tell technical things, and I thought, that's wrong. I mean, you know, they were destroying the whole building of my eyes by listening to them.
Yes.
On the other hand, the other evening, puzzle was interesting. Having seen this, I think, so far, and read about his work, finally hear it from the artist and to hear his attention to the whole aesthetic behind it. Will this catalog have the artist's aesthetic attention?
It's like the yellow pages. Yeah. The lady was asking if there'll be artist statements in the book, and I said yes. Yes. Yes.
I said, I don't think we're going to have any problem with youngsters having them relate to this or feel interested or enthusiastic or any other way they want to feel. I don't think we're worried about that. I think what most of us are worried about are asking questions like, how did they make this and how did they do that? In other words, we're lacking technical information. Is there going to be some way we're going to get some kind of, well, naturally we can't all become engineers or scientists overnight, but some sort of simplified technical explanation that we can use to answer some of these.
Everything that Jane and I understand is in the book, and we can't, that's the limit of our understanding. I think no one could pretend to understand what the diversity of these things are. It's just hopeless. The range is from gas plasmas in one room to optical engineering of such a sophisticated kind that very few people would understand what happens to, oh God, it doesn't end. One can't pretend to know that, but I think what we understand is in the book and pretty clearly expressed.
The only place in which this is going to arise, I think, is in the Whitman room, which you'll see later, and that is very mysterious and does bear explanation, which neither Maurice nor I are very good at giving. But I think in every other case, it's a very simple thing. It's one word: gas plasmas, lasers, strobe lights. And beyond that, people are going to be mystified, and that's all right.
Is your implication then that you don't read those
Possibly.
I don't know. I think we'll know more when we walk through. It never occurred to me one way or the other. I assume that we will. I think we do have to have docents. How they're deployed is something else. I think you have to have docents. Just it's works of art, and there'll be people who will have a lot of questions, and they'll have to be available. Yes. Yes. Very few. The ice bag, Rauschenberg's piece called Muse, maybe one other. The Fallstrom, yeah, maybe the Kitai. Most are self-destruct. Yes. Yeah. Sure.
Will the scientific alter ego of the artist be available for comment or discussion at your symposium? In other words,
Sure.
I would be interested
Oh, I see what you mean.
if you follow in as well as the
Mhm.
artist's interpretation of philosophy, but the scientific.
There's just no room on the stage. We'll have them in the audience, and maybe we'll be able to have them available. But there's no room on the stage for more than we have, which is about 7 people. That's stretching it a bit. But I think they'll all be here, and in certain cases, they're remarkable people. Yes?
I was wondering, several questions come to my mind just about the show, not having read the book or anything. But did the artists necessarily know anything about the materials they were working with before they took it up, say the ice bag, for instance, working with that type of material? Did they have to learn it when they went to the company they were going to work with? And how much control did they have on the actual manufacture of the object? Did they make their blueprints and their drawings in advance, and then just see it after it was put together, or what did they do with it?
Everything you've described happened. How would you generalize that? They had some inkling of some part of the material in every case. For example, Oldenburg is a soft sculptor, so he knew about vinyl, but he didn't know anything about hydraulics or the systems that would be used to inflate or deflate it. I think that's a good characterizing example, as a matter of fact.
Work on putting it, actually doing the seams and cutting and putting it together, did he?
Well, everything was done under his supervision. Well, I think what Jane was trying to say before is that the nature of many different people in different parts of the country doing things for you to your specifications is such that you can't get it exactly the way you want it for reasons that you don't know about. So there's not, with dealing with technology, there's never that kind of control that you have when you have a piece of clay in your hand and you're kneading it. But other than that, artists strove for maximum control. Yes?
How were they selected? They stated when you said they were divided up 3 different sections, lasers and experimental and so forth. Did you send them to a certain time, or did they specify they wanted to go for the lasers, give them experiments? How this would be interesting. Why this artist selected this particular?
Yeah. Now, Jane's thing about the 3 categories, what she was talking about is after the whole thing was done, we realized that there were 3 types of activity. It wasn't that we started off by saying there are 3 types of activity. That's one part. The second thing is the way we figured out is, let's say we worked from lists of artists that we knew about or liked and were recommended to us. And we looked at Oldenburg's name, and one of us said, wouldn't it be terrific to have Oldenburg in Disneyland? So we tried to get Disney, and when we got it, we went to Klaus, and he came out. That's one characteristic case. Rockne Krebs works with lasers, is a technological artist. So we tried to find a company, and then we went to him and said, we hear you're very good. Would you like to work at this company? A third type would be, and those two actually account for less of what happened. The thing that really happened was we'd like an artist, we'd say, look, we've contracted these companies. These 2 or 3 or 4 sound interesting to me. We'd go to Tony Smith and say, I don't know, it sounds to us like Container Corporation of America, and there was another one we had. I don't know, some company might be of interest to you. And he was interested enough to come out and tour those 2 plus another 2 that we had that we thought might be of interest. And he picked Container, and Container was happy with him, and they worked it out. So we narrowed the field down from 37 to 2, 3, or 4, and exposed the artist to 2, 3, or 4 places, and sometimes sometimes it clicked, often it didn't. We'd bring in Philip King from London, and he would tour 4 companies that we thought would be of interest to him because he's a sculptor, and they have terrific resources, different kinds of resources. He just was turned off by all 4 of them. This happened time and time again, not to anyone's surprise. Yeah. Well, that's the whole theme of the whole book, yeah.
They had questions before technology, and you said you don't know enough, we don't. But how do they become involved in the theory vital
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
I know you people are terribly pressed for time, but I also know that you have some slides from and presentation that I read that with sort of changes that come out in specific objects between Osaka and here was very condensed and assigned, and I think would give people a very good idea how to deal with specific objects, which is what the group considers how to discuss an object. I mean, we can't do the whole blockchain implementation of this art technology stuff. And if there's any time that you can kind of show those slides,
Don't you think a walkthrough would be better, Linda? A walk through the show, which is what we're planning to do on May 5th. Yeah, that I think would be much better. If the group's under, I mean, we couldn't walk through this size group just because no one room would handle us. But any smaller group, we could just walk through. That's fine. That's what I was told. Yeah. Well, I think that's fine. That's perfectly all right. Yeah.
you had mentioned that there were originally 80 artists involved, but you're only showing 16 artists' work. Now, what happened to the other 64?
Well, I was just explaining that. We invited in different ways 80 artists to have a look at companies. We expected and budgeted that about 18 of them would actually take up residence and go through a full term and make an exhibitable work of art. And that's what happened. The others came, looked around, and didn't want any part of it, or did 2 weeks. Larry Bell did a month and a half at Rand. It was very interesting. There's no thing to show from it. It may appear 5 years later in his work. Irwin has a work in the show, but that's not the main result of what happened with him at Rand. The thing was set up as a program to expose all these different companies, all these different artists. And we figured that with all those connections, something exhibitable would come out. And in fact, that's what happened. And funnily enough, that is the proportion we had to use, that we guessed that when we made up the budget in about 1967 of the whole thing. Yeah. I don't know. The show's not finished. Sure. And that will vary a lot, too. Oh, no. The show in Japan had 8 works. Only one was an object, and that's the ice bag. I think the ice bag is a supreme work of the 20th century. The other 7 have almost no relation to what's being shown in these galleries, because there we had incredible limitations, a traffic flow of 10,000 people an hour. I mean, that's like a stream of sardines or something. It means everything had to be designed to allow maximum racing through, and it was. And so each of the 7 works were designed for this and other conditions, which have nothing to do with museum conditions. And the works are of a completely different character. Yes?
Mr. Tuckman, I'm at a disadvantage because I haven't seen the catalog
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that art is no longer a painting or a sculpture at all, and I certainly wouldn't say that to the public. I also don't believe it. I think that technology opens new possibilities. I think there will always be painters who work this big, and there'll be sculptors that work with bronze, and I don't think that anything is dying because a new field is opening up. I don't think this should be seen as supplanting other forms of expression. Do you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
So much as supplanting,
Mm-hmm.
but especially in the pieces that this museum is getting in the modern floors. Becomes, let's say, less and less the concept, which is easy to understand for the public, and the technology is becoming more and more important. What I'm saying is I think it would be very helpful for all of us, whether we're going to tour Art and Technology, to have some certain background on this particular show. I do think what's happening technologically is influencing modern art in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Therefore, wouldn't it be helpful for us?
But you have the book. I don't quite follow. You have the book which talks about that. Yes. Was there a humanizing effect in this interaction between artist and company? Jane, was there a humanizing effect in this?
That's a more difficult question than it seems to be. I mean, there's a whole body of literature dealing with what is humanization in this context and what does it mean when you think of a separation between disciplines. So any answer to that would be qualified, and as I say, it's a difficult question. But I think yes, at least in a few cases, one could say in some way that there was some so-called, quote, humanizing effect that took place, although it's a meaningless answer, really, in a way.
There certainly was no anti-humanization brought about by...
That we could say with the positive.
I think what we should probably do is let you get back to your office, and as soon as the members' benefit catalogs come, the ladies, I'm sure, will read everything. I'm sorry that they were not...
That's fine. That's perfectly fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, ladies. Do we still have most of the ladies here who will tour Art and Technology? Are most of the ladies in the auditorium? And you haven't run me out of town on a rail. Melinda Turbell. Melinda, where is Melinda? Would you come up here a minute, please? Melinda has a great love for and a great deal of knowledge in this area. But more importantly, of course, Maurice has too, but Melinda is a docent, one of our very best, and she would like to talk to the group. So not right now, but I think I'll have her say. Do you have time, Melinda?
Well, I'm not.
It's really quite unfair, you know. I'm sure she'd like to prepare a little bit.
I could, if there are things that are bothering you specifically right now, I could try to talk a little bit about them. I feel very badly about just the general, vibrations that are going on in this room right now, and the discomfort that people are feeling, and I just mentioned to Winnie that at some point I'd be happy to talk to the people who are going to tour the show about my feelings about this show and my interpretations, and a little bit about some of the specific objects. And I could do a little bit now, but I'm not prepared or organized, and I haven't really thought about it. I mean, it just occurred to me now that there is a need of something, some sort of more feeling between you people and what's going to be going on in this show. Did you want to ask something? Well, that's fine too, if it could be open to the whole group. Yes?
Melinda, perhaps after we've had the walkthrough.
I'd much rather do it before. When is the walkthrough? Yeah, well. Yes. Well, anyway, that's not really the point, because the ideas that we have to deal with the public are very different kinds of things, and they have to do with specific objects as opposed to general philosophy, which is very, very complex. And well, yes. The question was the problem that may come up about people wondering if this is art, and that's certainly not a new question. I mean, every time you go up in the modern levels of the permanent collection, you get this. And nobody's ever been able to define what art is. That's one of the excitements about art, that it's totally elusive, and the minute you try to pin it down, you just lose it. It goes beyond definitions. I mean, even if you think, say, about something like the Mona Lisa and why it's so tremendously valuable, and all it is some oil paint on a piece of canvas, and what makes it art? It's some sort of transformation between a subject that the artist was looking at and something else he did with it when he transformed it into a material object. And when people ask me, or I've tried to figure out a definition about what art is or art should be, and I think that any great artist at any time radically alters our way of looking at the world. This was true in the Renaissance with the development of perspective, which was a mathematical system and way beyond the comprehension of the general public. Or with Impressionism, the very abstruse theories about refraction of light and the way we perceive things, optics. All of this was way beyond the public. And in this art and technology show, they're going to be altering our way of looking at the world. Now, for instance, in Rauschenberg's piece, which is called Mud Muse, this is one I do know about. What it is, it's a big tank of mud that bubbles. Now, people can say, is this art? Well, the point is, when you look at it, you're going to have a very unique kind of experience in looking at mud. It's going to be very exciting, and you won't be able to look at mud again with the same eyes. And I think this is what art does. It makes you look at the world in a new way. Rauschenberg's piece, he worked with Teledyne, and I've forgotten the dimensions. I think it's 9 feet by 15 feet, a plexiglass tank, which is filled with mud, which weighs many, many tons and is very complex. I mean, just in sheer weight. And it is wired beneath in a very complicated way to pump air up through the mud so that it bubbles, like the paint pots in the desert, which is his original inspiration for the piece. And it's also wired with various kinds of noises, like, well, one of the noises is people gluing together the cardboard boxes in the Tony Smith, which is in the next room. And, oh, I imagine there'll be noises of water running or people walking, maybe. Just very random, normal noises in the environment. I think there's 65 different noises. And he was very, very concerned that these noises should, these come about as the air is pumped up through the mud. And he was very concerned that the noises occur randomly. And this is a very difficult thing to program, to make, say, one noise go off at one time and 24 at another. And for many years, he and John Cage, a composer, have been very involved with ideas of randomness and chance, and coming from, in part, Oriental philosophy, and they're all involved in the Chinese Book of Chants, the I Ching. And to go to a company and say, I want these things to go off randomly, was one of the big problems they had, trying to get this thing to work randomly. And how can you control randomness? And this is a very, interesting question intellectually. But at any rate, it's going to be extremely provocative having all these peculiar noises, not peculiar, very commonplace noises that we associate in different contexts coming up through this mud. And I'm not sure exactly how they'll be activated, whether it has to do with people walking around in the gallery that will activate these various noises, or whether it's programmed to do it, because both possibilities have been discussed. That's one object. Mm-hmm. Whitman's piece, I haven't seen, and I don't. I don't even know what it's involved in. I think it has mirrors and various, very strange, it changes your perception of your surroundings and yourself as you walk into the room. It disorients you in terms of any way of relating to space that's familiar. But I don't know, I haven't seen the piece. Also, between the catalog and when a lot of these pieces have actually been completed for exhibition, there have been a lot of changes made in the pieces themselves. So some of the ideas in the catalog are in a sense obsolete, although they're very important in terms of working process in how they arrived at the final point of making an object for the exhibition. One of the easiest things to deal with, I'm sure, and the first thing you'll run into, it will be Oldenburg's ice bag. It's really more or less a traditional work of art, a kinetic sculpture. And anyone who's, I'm sure most of you know something about Oldenburg in the past. And did you come and hear his talk the other night, anybody? Because that went into it in great and wonderful, kind of humor, the associations, the thought processes he went through. He looks at any object sort of as an extension of himself, or a human being, or a life process, the way we sort of tend to think of objects when we're children, that they have, a living force. There's something you can relate to on a direct and human and personal level. And this ice bag form appealed, I mean, it suggested all kinds of things to him. It suggested an ice cream cone in one situation, or a nose, or a combination of an ice bag and a nose and a handbag, a lady's handbag, which is being made as a multiple at Gemini. And this just continually moving form relates to the human life process, which is the way he views objects as extensions of himself, or people, living things, soft, related to gravity, in a continuous process of evolution and change, never the same at any particular moment. And then, on the other hand, it's so funny. I mean, it's really a funny concept to see this giant ice bag writhing through all these motions and going through a dance and so forth. And it will be different whether it's a daylight. And he says particularly he's interested in seeing it in the rain because of the quality of the materials and the way the rain will fall off it, which is very beautiful. But just the idea that art can be something that's very funny, or that humor is a very, very important element in our lives, is a major component of his work, and something that we tend to forget about art. I think that art is supposed to be something very serious, uplifting, something, on some higher plane of existence than our everyday lives. And to have this element of humor is very delightful and also very profound. I think someone the other night asked him about whether he was just trying to be funny in these things he does, and they're outrageously funny. But he said he was very serious about it. And if you lose your ability to experience humor in life, then it's a very sad thing. And it is a very serious thing to maintain people's sense of humor. Also, the use of these really commonplace objects we don't necessarily associate with beauty and something that we can look at and enjoy, is something I think that's very important right now, because we tend to look at the environment and the landscape as so ugly and ruined and polluted and disgusting, that if we can get back to some point of looking at the ordinary things around us, the trash, things we throw away, an ice bag, no one would particularly want to look at an ice bag, as something that is potentially enjoyable, then it can do a great deal for our just everyday existence. It's very necessary, I think. And his art is intimately involved in everyday life and looking at things and relating to things from moment to moment, not just as an isolated art experience at a museum, but something that we can all develop this sensitivity toward the peculiar way things can appear. His perception of anything is so far away from the normal, and this is what I mean by an art or an artist really radically changing your way of looking at the world. For instance, he really likes to fly, and he says that he travels a great deal throughout this country and Europe, and he said part of the reason he got into his recent interest in building very monumental objects in terms of monuments is from the experience of flying and how that changes your perception of scale. And whereas most people, when they get on an airplane, are normally terrified and want to drink and smoke and have movies or do anything to distract themselves from the fact that they're up in a plane flying, he feels very uncomfortable because this is what the society does, try to take you away from that experience. And he wishes he could have a tube from himself to the outside of the plane so he could really experience flying. Now that, to me, is really a far-out perception of the world around you. I mean, it's the total opposite of our normal reactions. And this is what his art does. It gives you a whole new way of looking and relating to things. Anyway,
Do you feel overburdened mocking society at the same time?
I really don't think he is. I think it's possible to read that into it. And the difference between what an artist intends and what the art object ends up being, they're two different things. And often whatever the artist thinks is not the way the work of art is interpreted, which doesn't mean that the way it's interpreted isn't as valid. And a lot of people have directly discussed this. Like, for instance, Johns and Lichtenstein have both in interviews talked about whether they intended their work to be social comment. And they've both said no, they didn't. However, it's inevitable that it will be. And for instance, John said that it's like if somebody was trying to make chewing gum and someone else used the product as glue, then it would end up being glue instead of chewing gum, regardless of what, you know, the person who did it in the first place had in mind. And both of these levels are equally meaningful. And if it mocks society, to us when we look at it, it is a mockery of society. I don't think primarily that's what he's saying. I think he has a tremendously accepting attitude about these things. Don't you think, from hearing him talk?
I had a mixed feeling that he had his tongue in his cheek constantly,
Well, he does.
that his work wasn't being very serious, that his marvelous sense of humor had all the time, kind of covering the hurt in some way, the hurt he feels about his work.
Yes, I think that there is that level. And in his early career as an artist, he was very concerned with the brutality of the street and the hardship of poverty. And he lived in a very poor section in New York and used debris from the street and the street life. And he was concerned with the kind of anguish with that, but it also, at the same time, he kind of accepted it all and turning it into an art form, celebrated it. So there are the two levels.
When you, there was a suggestion that perhaps this show should be toured in a different way, in that instead of herding people through, that there be people, that there be docents at the various objects, and that that each docent try to talk about, say, one or two objects. And from the point of view of the audience, would that be more meaningful?
Well, I think it really has to do with the size of the crowds that are going to. I don't know whether this is going to be just, you know, an unhandleable thing like Cubism or not. I imagine probably it will be, that there'll be lots and lots of people. And I think either way, I think perhaps the best suggestion was the idea that maybe people could come after looking at the show and talk to a docent and ask questions. I don't know. It seems to me if you have someone just standing there, that you'll still have a big crowd around you.
Well, it seems to me that it's a more contemplative thing, you know, where they must go and experience it, and that it loses, even with the most articulate docents, that something is lost by herding them through.
Definitely. On the other hand, it's what people really want. I mean, it just never ceases to amaze me how with a group of 150 people that you're herding around, everyone sticks with you. I would think they would just give up in disgust and walk away. They can't possibly see what you're talking about. And yet people have some incredible need to be told information. They're not able, for some reason, the people who take tours. Other people don't, the ones who have that ability to go and really experience and relate on their own, I don't think take tours. I sort of got that impression too. It depends again on the capacity, the crowds that we're going to have, and in some cases, you can't have too many people in some of those areas just because of the damage potential. Yeah, like Barney's Beanery was during the keynote show, or I think perhaps one of the reasons that Irwin and Terrell's piece, as they originally projected it, was not, well, one of the reasons that it was never realized is because that people would have to go in one at a time, and they would have to spend, say, 6 to 15 minutes in each of two sections. Now, this would be totally unfeasible in terms of the sort of situation we have at this museum with just the mobs of people coming in and out. And it is going to be a terrible problem, I imagine, with this show if we draw the numbers of people that we've been drawing. So maybe they will have a queue situation. Anyway, if we want to set up some day to talk about this, why don't we do it?
What about next Monday afternoon at 1 o'clock? We're having a docent lecture in the morning at 10 and 12. Visual lecture, or sometime next Monday.
Okay.
Small lecture hall. I don't think, because we have the main for the docent for the visual lecture.
How about doing it at 12:30?